This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Hello, Danger Dogs. It's Tom here. Hope you're doing well. Bringing you another Patreon episode, and this is a special little live gig. Emerald's not involved, I'm sorry. She's dead to it. No. This is an event that I hosted for the Information Rights Project at the Wheeler Centre in Melbourne, in Naarm. It's called Freedom for the Press. And it was me hosting a pretty awesome panel discussing the state of the freedom of press in Australia, how it's under threat, how whistleblowers and journalists are often treated like shit, thanks to national security legislation and defamation rules and all these kind of things. And yeah, just the state of freedom of expression and what we can do about it. The panel, pretty cool. Andrew Wilkie MP, former Greens member, since independent federal MP for Clark. Greg Barnes, SC, and Melissa Fyfe, the journalist as well. Really interesting conversation. And they've very kindly given us the audio to share with you, dear listeners. If you want to find out more about the Information Rights Project, do informationrights.org. This is basically the charity that's been set up in the wake of the Assange campaign. So all the energy and organizing and concerns and cool politics that was associated with freeing Julian Assange lives on in the Information Rights Project. Gabrielle Shipton, Julian's brother's heavily involved. He spoke at the start of this event. They're doing good stuff, and they're doing things like trying to make Julian the Australian of the Year, standing by Mary Kostakidis, and standing up for whistleblowers. Informationrights.org is their website. But please enjoy what I think was a really interesting conversation.
I want to invite to the stage Melissa Fyfe, Tom Ballard, Greg Barnes, and Andrew Wilkie.
Gabrielle Shipton, everybody, please. Thank you, Gabrielle, for that lovely welcome. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here this evening. It is a pleasure to be with you. I didn't quite realise this is the first event of the Information Rights Project, and I'm sure it's going to be the first of many. So thank you so much for coming along on a Tuesday evening. My name is Tom Ballard. I'm going to be your host for this evening. I'm a comedian. If you're not familiar with my work, I'm like Joel Creasy, but more available and fatter. And I briefly worked in the media. I hosted a TV show on the ABC about the news called Tonightly with Tom Ballard. Give us a cheer if you watch Tonightly. Brutal, okay? And that's why we were cancelled in September of 2018, which was devastating for our viewer. There's a lot of debate about why Tonightly was cancelled. Some say we were too dangerous and we were pissing off the Morrison Conservative government and they couldn't handle our edgy satire. Other people say it's because we were once beaten in the ratings by a repeat of Deuce Bigalow, European Gigolo. So we'll never know. I like to think it was the first one. So I'm a very silly comedian and I'm not as qualified as these lovely people here, but I am a big fan of truth and a free press, and I care about this country and our democracy. And while at sometimes some parts of the Australian media regularly make me want to gouge my own eyes out, I think it's very important to have good journalism, and I have nothing but love and respect for whistleblowers out there, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation we're going to have tonight. Full disclosure, I'm a member of the Australian Greens. I want to put that out there. I also co-host a podcast called Serious Danger about green left politics in this country. So I have a podcast which makes me a citizen journalist who does his own research. Let's go with that. Tonight's event is titled Freedom for the Press. We're talking about the free press. It's presented by Barry Weiss. And no, okay, I thought that'd get a laugh. That's fine. We're here to unpack the state of press freedom in Australia, a country that calls itself a democracy, yet where secrecy laws, defamation threats, and the prosecution of whistleblowers have made the simple act of truth-telling increasingly risky. I'm sure it's going to be a very short conversation. There's not a lot going on in this space. We'll probably chat for about 15 minutes, and then we can all be home for my kitchen rules. Again, that's a joke. We're going to be here for 6 hours. We have an amazing panel of very qualified speakers. I'm delighted they're all joining us, and I'd ask you to welcome them as I announce their names. We have the independent federal MP for the seat of Clark and long-time defender of whistleblowers and press freedom, Andrew Wilkie. The barrister and indefatigable human rights advocate, Greg Barnes, SC. Hello, Greg. And the award-winning investigative journalist and senior writer with Good Weekend and The Age, Melissa Fyfe.
Hi, everyone. A politician, a lawyer, and a journalist walk into the Wheeler Centre and have a wonderful conversation about press freedom. The way tonight's going to work is we're going to have a conversation for about an hour or so, somewhere around that length. We're going to talk about big picture stuff and comment on recent relevant events. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. Then we have time at the end for your questions. We'd love to hear from you. Keep that in mind throughout our conversation. If you feel like we're missing something or something in particular you'd like to hear from these three wonderful people about on this topic, we would love to hear from you. We have a Slido QR code question situation. We'll come back to this. You can scan this at the end there. If technology is not your thing, we'll have a microphone as well. But we'd love to hear from you towards the end of our conversation. So please keep that in mind. The good people at the Information Rights Project have suggested that we explore three key themes this evening. The legal and political barriers that make it harder for journalists and whistleblowers to do their jobs. The impact of censorship and self-censorship on what the public gets to know and what remains hidden. And most importantly, why protecting the right to know is essential for the health of our democracy. Now, I think they're all great. I think we can start with the third one first, because it's pretty uncontroversial. Everyone in this room cares about a free press and knows why and believes it's important and fundamental to the health of our democracy. So I'd love to just hear from our three panellists reflect on that idea. Why is protecting the public's right to know and a free press so essential to our politics, our freedom and our democracy? And we might start with our resident journalist, Mel.
Oh my goodness. I really feel that now more than ever, given the situation with the whole world, that I feel just the basics are so important, which the basics I mean just reporting what happened in a way that sort of that doesn't isn't affected by disinformation, misinformation, in a way that is clear-eyed and tries to get to the nub of the day, whatever happened on the day. Then there's also a really important role that the press plays in investigative journalism, and just to think of one example by my colleagues, which I think is so crucial, is the investigation that we ran at The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald called Building Bad, which was an incredible investigation into the CFMEU and their incorporation of underworld figures, the dodgy contracts, the connections, the fact that the Labor government looked away from what was going on in building sites. I can't think of another media organisation or team. Nick McKenzie and Ben Schneiders were the key reporters there. They suffered threats. The work that they did was actually really dangerous, but it was really important, and I think that kind of work really needs to be supported, and it just makes me really value their work as journalists.
Greg, how about you?
Well, look, I just to pick up...
So if I could ask you to bring that mic just a little bit closer to you, that'd be great. Thanks, mate.
Just to pick up what Melissa said, the hallmark of a democracy is meant to be that we have freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And that, of course, is predicated upon a position that says that a free press and the free reporting of material, irrespective of how uncomfortable it might be, ought to be allowed within certain limits. It's not a free-for-all. But whilst these are motherhood statements, one of the fundamental problems in this country is that they are not protected, these rights, because we do not have a Human Rights Act. And so whilst this is a general statement to get the discussion going, you can't leave that alone, because if you don't have a Human Rights Act, if you don't have the Canadian protections, the South African protections, the UK protections, European protections, a lot of what we're talking about tonight is far more difficult. And the sort of reporting that you can get away with in this country and the sort of whistleblowing you can get away with in this country, and by get away with I mean protected from reprisal, is not constitutionally secured, and that is a serious problem in a democracy.
I definitely want to come back to that. Andrew, how about you, reflecting on the broader importance of protecting the public's right to know?
Well, history shows clearly that governments and many in the private sector default towards secrecy. And the only way that secrecy can be busted open is when people who are witness to things that are irregular or worse, criminal, that they speak up. But speaking up is actually a fairly unproductive exercise unless there's someone to actually tell the community what you're speaking up about. I imagine, as a whistleblower myself, I suppose I'm here as the politician and the whistleblower, and that's fine. But my observation is that people who speak up are almost completely ineffective unless the media publicises it. And they need to have an unrestrained legal right to publicise it. When I spoke up over the lies behind the invasion of Iraq in 2003, no one would have known what I had to say unless the media reported it. Julian Assange's circumstances, through his whole saga, in particular when he was jailed in Belmarsh prison, would have been unknown to the world unless the media publicised it. David McBride's circumstances, where he is now, jailed for revealing information about war crimes in Afghanistan, would be unknown unless the media publicised it. I could go on. Tony Hoffman, the nurse who publicised or revealed the deadly misconduct of a doctor at Bundaberg Hospital, would be unknown unless the media publicised it. I could go on to another 20 minutes with examples, but you get the point. The media is such a fundamentally important foundation stone of a healthy democracy. And not only do I lament the fact that Australia does not have a legally enshrined right to free speech, it has no legally enshrined rights to media freedom. And I'm certainly starting to focus that more in this term of Parliament, that let's keep talking about whistleblowers and the National Anti-Corruption Commission and freedom of information, but let's start talking as much about media freedom.
We mentioned some of the scoops there. Do you have an example, Greg, of like the press at its absolute best? Massive stories where the media, a free media, has been able to expose corruption or the abuse of power from governments or massive corporations that come to mind?
Well, there are many. Nick McKenzie, who's a friend of mine, I said to Nick recently, he's become the Bradman of awards in Australia. He just gets one every year. His average is 99.94. He doesn't go to an awards night without coming back with 3 or 4, like you, Melissa, of course. There've been many. The reason, for example, that you have royal commissions, the reasons you have commission of inquiries, the reason that you have legislation is often because there have been whistleblowers, people like Andrew and others, and Julian and others who've done it, and who changed the landscape. In terms of examples, and leaving aside the examples that you've talked about already, I think, another key example, which goes some years back now, and there'll be some of us in this room who'd remember it, I was at university at the time, was the Costigan Royal Commission, and the revelations about tax avoidance in this country. And some of you here who were around in the early 80s, late 70s, that uncovered through what were not called whistleblowers at the time, but people who came forward and said, look, there are vast amounts of undeclared tax in this country. And to the credit of John Howard, who was then Treasurer in the Fraser government, he passed retrospective tax legislation, which was highly controversial, which sought to sweep up this amount. But that lifted the underbelly of Australia in a remarkable way, and it doesn't get the credit that it should get, because it led, of course, to the establishment of anti-corruption commissions in Australia. National Crime Authority, the NACC, ICAC in New South Wales, etc.
That could be the first time to the credit of John Howard has been said at the Wheeler Centre. So I think
I left the Liberal Party because of John Howard, so there's no love lost. But he did pick that up, and in fact I had the great pleasure the other day and if you get a chance, you should. I think he's about to do some podcasts. And just quickly, John Menadue. John Menadue is a remarkable Australian. He's 90 years of age, and he is the last person still alive who was a key player in the dismissal, because he, of course, was head of Prime Minister in Cabinet, and he worked for Whitlam and he worked for Fraser. Anyway, he's about to do some podcasts. But look, he was around at those times, and I'll just want to make one other quick point, and then I'll shut up. I promise. You should never invite a barrister. Because there's no judge here to stop me.
Order!
I'm getting a filthy look from Andrew Wilkie.
Well, Greg's billing by 30-second increments, so...
Just quickly, though, that was an era in which governments did start to lift the lid. The Ombudsman Act, Freedom of Information Act, in Victoria, similar, and both Liberal and Labor governments did it. They were committed to, in the 1970s, in fact, there's an episode of Yes Minister on open government. I mean, it takes the piss out of it, but that was the theme. And now, as has been said, and Andrew's absolutely rightly said, governments are obsessed with secrecy. And if you look at the big build, that's an example where the Allen government, the Andrews government just said, oh, well, nothing to see here. Now shut up.
That's just an example of corruption commissions. When the Victorian government finally, after many, many years, decided to set up the IBAC, my colleague and I, Royce Miller, we thought we would, it was sort of rolling through the beginning of the legislation, and we thought we'd have a look at that legislation, the draft legislation, and we did that really closely, and we also pulled in a few lawyers and we said, what's going on here? And we made a lot of calls on it. And what we actually realised was that there were all these people trying to carve themselves out of the corruption of the IBAC through the legislation. And in fact, there was one, there were some of these problems have been fixed in Victoria, but not all of them. There were some huge holes in it. And we reported on those and pushed the IBAC to be, we hope, a better bill. It wasn't perfect, but I think that kind of reporting was really important. Probably nobody read it. It wasn't very exciting, but it was important.
No, thank God you go through all that boring stuff to keep us safe. That's great. I mean, I wrote down these two quotes. I'm sure people are very familiar with these, and I think it's important. From William Randolph Hearst: news is something somebody doesn't want printed, all else is advertising. And of course, I.F. Stone, all governments lie. So which goes back to your point about secrecy, and it's very important we have a free press who's prepared to do the work to expose that. And just before we move on to the rest of it, on this point, do we also see the importance of a free press when we see the press neglecting their duty? And I'm thinking particularly of something like the New York Times or the Washington Post backing in the WMD lie, right? That's when we see a free press neglecting in its opportunity, buying the government's lie and just propagating that misinformation, and yes, neglecting their duty as a free press and keeping the public truly informed.
Well, that was clearly a rhetorical question.
I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, Ed.
Well, it is a rhetorical question because when the media doesn't do its duty, that can be as damaging or more damaging than it doing its duty. To use that term twice tonight, I lament the fact that the media in Australia is so polarised. And I'm going to offend a few people here. All media outlets have an angle.
They do.
I don't know that any media outlet is without its take on things. And anyone who's there thinking, oh, I'm not real sure about what Andrew is saying, I think you're being a bit naive. And I certainly start my day or go through my day and I read, I read The Australian, I read the Fin Review, I read the Fairfax Papers, The Age, Sydney Morning Herald, I read my local rag, The Mercury. I watch Sky News, I watch ABC, 24, and across the whole lot, I then, am informed. But I think I'm a bit odd. I will accuse many in this audience of going to the media that accords with your view of the world. And it just reinforces your view of the world. And most people don't have access to, or the inclination or the wealth to afford to go to all of the world's media and to form that view. And that's a real shame.
Well, we can skip Sky News, can't we?
I will even go to Sky After Dark and hear...
You got to know what they're saying. It's wild.
It does get more difficult the later it goes on, the later in the night. But no, I make a point of listening to all those points of view. And I am odd. Most people don't. I would like media to go back to the days when most journalists reported the facts of the matter, and then on the opinion pages there was some opinion articles. Wouldn't that be refreshing? Whereas now, and okay, I'll take them on, the Australian newspaper is the worst offender, where every article has an editorial line. And that is not in the public interest, one bit. But that is, if I owned a newspaper, I would say I have a right to publish what I want, and I do. Maybe what we need to do is focus more on critical thinking in our schools and amongst our younger people so that they can read stuff and they can put it in context, but sadly they don't. My wife Claire, she gets the news from Guardian Australia. That's good, it's a great publication, it's a great media outlet, but that's all Claire watches, or reads I should say. And Claire, that's not a criticism of my wife, by the way. I'm very, very happily married to Claire. But
For now.
until she sees this podcast.
Yeah. Just quickly, Mel, do you want to defend the Australian or anything? Or?
I actually agree with Andrew that it's a great source of sadness for me that the media has become so bifurcated. It's so kind of you've got right and left, and there's a point of view, I guess. I don't feel that very strongly. I think at the Age and the Herald, I think we try to go into the centre. But I'm an extremely old-fashioned sort of journalist. Like, I love talking to people who have an opposite view, and I think it's fundamental to news reporting and any sort of reporting that you need to talk to people who you probably don't like, you might not agree with them, but you've got to hear them. You've got to hear them. I was on a panel for some trainees, interviewing trainees a couple of years ago, and I just thought, oh my God, like some of the young people coming up, I just don't know if they value that central kind of journalism anymore. But that was pounded into us as young journalists that we have to talk to everyone. And I'm a bit old-fashioned like you, I think, Andrew.
All right, well, that's great. We all agree a free press is very important, and that's why we're here tonight. So I want to discuss and get into the meat of the conversation, which is the question of just how free it is in this country right now. And Greg, yes, if you can give us a brief overview, what would you say are the biggest legal barriers when it comes to how the jobs of journalists and whistleblowers are becoming harder? What are the major legal barriers for that cause?
Well, I think in relation to whistleblowers, and Andrew knows much better than me, but it's the issue of lack of protections, effective protections for whistleblowers in this country. I think the second issue is the increasing use of non-disclosure agreements. For those who need a very brief explanation, they're often signed as a result of an agreement between parties where there's been a dispute, often employer-employee, but also used in sexual abuse cases, forced adoption cases and others, and they're appalling because they stop people from then going out and talking about the matter. The third issue is the disturbing amount of legislation which George Brandis, who's one of the most pompous creatures you could ever meet. I don't know why the Age runs him. Why does the Age run him?
I don't know.
I mean, it's just predictable. It's the most predictable bullshit, I mean, honestly, and written in this sort of pompous, tendentious way. I mean, George, took silk. He'd been at the bar for about 5 minutes, but he's one of those politicians that I need to take silk. I've done nothing at the bar, but I know the Chief Justice. But anyway, that's George. But he introduced some of the...
Stay on topic, councillor, please. You're skating on thin ice.
You need a gavel.
This is a sort of Keating-like approach. You got to, take a few on the way through. The way it is. I mean,
Right.
Now, Greg,
Peter Archer.
I'd remind you that the defences against defamation include if it's your opinion or if it's the truth.
I was going to get on to Peter Archer. But just quickly, Brad has introduced legislation that said that in relation to what are essentially special operations of ASIO, which the ASIO Director General can designate, you can go to jail if you're a journalist and you report it. And you can go to jail if you are the person who gives it to a journalist, which means, and special operations are effectively where ASIO is given immunity, criminal immunity and civil immunity, except in exceptional circumstances such as you can't kill someone. But that I think was one of the most draconian examples of curtailment of freedom of the press in the post-9/11 environment.
So there's literally, if someone at ASIO knows that ASIO is doing the wrong thing, there is literally no avenue for them to legally...
Not if it's a special operation.
Disseminate information. Okay,
Yeah.
Right. And so that's national security laws. Can I throw, are there sedition laws as well that sort of play a
Well,
serious
I mean,
role?
yes and no, and people talk about defamation. I'm a little bit conflicted here because I do favour suppression orders in many cases, and that's because of the irresponsibility of some of the media and trial by media. And with the greatest respect to Nick Mackenzie, he and I have had this debate over the years, but I think suppression orders are necessary in cases to protect the rights of an accused person when there's been media vilification. And you mightn't like this, but George Pell is a good example. He was vilified prior to his trial. Vilified. No chance in front of a jury, in my view. And that's not what you want. Everybody's entitled to a fair trial. So when it comes to suppression orders, I probably am not on the same page as some people in this room.
But sorry, sedition or
I don't think sedition is a major issue. I think anti-terror laws are problematic. I appeared in the Melbourne terrorism case 15 years ago now, and I think anti-terror laws are problematic, although haven't been used a lot. But, what the main aspect of that is the National Security and Information Act, which means that some material can be deemed to be secret and the defence can't see it and the media can't see it, only the judge can see it or the magistrate can see it, and the Attorney-General has to sign off on whether or not questions can be asked about it. That is a serious problem.
Gosh. Mel, I'd love to hear the journo's perspective on suppression orders. We're actually discussing that briefly backstage there.
Yeah.
We'd love your thoughts on that and generally speaking, how the law affects what you do and trying to get to the truth of matters.
Yeah. So suppression orders I do think are an issue. Obviously sometimes there are cases where a suppression order makes sense. But what's happened in particularly the Victorian legal system is that there's so many given. And I feel that it's almost like defamation, which is if you can afford a barrister to go and argue the case, and judges really, they don't like journalists. I think they're tending towards issuing many, many more of these suppression orders, certainly than they ever did. There's not good numbers on them. But this year I was in court fighting a suppression order by a politician, and we lost, and that affected our reporting. But by far the biggest thing is defamation. The defamation laws in this country. I think there was a claim made that Sydney is the defamation capital of the world. Defamation laws really are for often rich white men who use them against the media, and it is has fundamentally had a chilling effect on our work. And we think about defamation all the time, and I can go into the way that that's changed our work. But of course, the Ben Roberts-Smith case, which again, Nick Mackenzie and the veteran journalist Chris Masters, they're reporting on accusing Ben Roberts-Smith of being a war criminal. That case, it's not an exaggeration to say that when that case was decided in the federal court, I think the whole newsroom was holding our breath, because if we couldn't prove that case, that would have had a much more of a chilling effect than already the defamation laws have with our journalism. incredibly, we did win that case. It was unbelievably expensive. I think the costs have been awarded in the order of $13 million. And the thing that really, which was backed by Kerry Stokes from Channel 7, Ben Roberts-Smith, the thing that really worries me about that is not only the effect that has on our reporting, but also the fact that who can afford to kind of stump up that kind of money? So we're in a new media age, which is supposed to have it's supposed to be the democratisation of the media. We're supposed to be moving away from these huge media companies to citizen journalism and all the rest of it, which is wonderful. But if you're an amazing investigative reporter and you put up your shingle and you start publishing on your website, one defamation case like that and, your house is gone. How can you sustain that? We can barely sustain that. And the whole media industry is shrinking. Our whole business model has changed. And the kind of threat that these cases pose to us is absolutely existential. And it's really changed the way that we've been reporting on things. Let me be clear about that. We make the same decisions to report on what we think is important, but what we do is we assess risk more carefully now, and I think that there's an upside to that, But I think that we have to make sure we've brought our lawyers in-house. I think I've done 2 lots of legal training this year. We're all very well legally trained, not as well as Greg, obviously, but we really think about it all the time.
But it's fair to say that there are stories we're not hearing. Stories do get spiked because, in the balance of probabilities, because of the defamation risk, it's decided that's not necessarily going to be worth it in the end if that defamation case is brought. Yeah,
it depends on the circumstances. I think what the stories that are spiked are like, is this worth it? But we still do the big hard ones. We still go after the big people. We still make those decisions. And I think it just takes, it's like even the story I did, the last story I did, a profile. I was on the phone to the lawyer before I'd written a word, trying to strategise about how to avoid a writ from that person.
Who was that person and who were they having sex with?
My last profile was a profile on the developer Tim Gurner, so that was kind of a bit hairy. Yeah,
You've got the resources.
We got through it.
Yeah, Andrew, do you want to weigh in on this?
Well, the other half of this story, at the end of the day, the media is seeking to publicise what someone is telling you, or what you found out yourself. In which case, that kind of makes you the whistleblower. So central to the story is, what are the protections for the whistleblowers, to your sources? And in Australia, the protections for whistleblowers are woefully inadequate. Now, let's talk about the public sector for a start. The Public Interest Disclosure Act was an act of the Federal Parliament 2012, Greg? 2013?
Yeah, 2013.
13, I think, yeah. And look, sadly, it was the Gillard government that was dragged kicking and screaming to introduce the Federal Public Interest Disclosure Act in, we think, 13. And Mark Dreyfus was the Attorney General at the time. At that point, every state and territory, or certainly every state, had reasonable public interest disclosure protections. The feds didn't. They'd been resisting for decades, over decades, in particular the Greens and the Democrats, you'd remember, were pushing for these protections. Eventually they were introduced, but what was introduced was entirely inadequate. That helps to explain why Richard Boyle got himself into the terrible strife he did just recently over his disclosures about egregious misconduct within the Australian Taxation Office. Allegations which were subsequently found to be accurate, and the ATO was put on notice to stop their atrocious behaviour towards some taxpayers. But yet Richard Boyle was still charged. He just in the last a few weeks, I think it was no conviction was recorded, but he's on a good behaviour bond. This is a great little case study, so just bear with me, because here is a federal public servant who makes a claim of egregious misconduct and whose claims are found to be correct, and he was charged and he went to court, and he's lucky he didn't have a conviction recorded. because of the deficiencies in the Public Interest Disclosure Act. It was agreed that his whistleblowing was lawful, but his act of collecting some evidence to allow him to whistleblow successfully was judged to be unlawful. Go figure. So how's that for a case study in the gaps in the public sector whistleblower protections? Meanwhile, in the private sector, there are some scant protections in the Corporations Act, thanks largely to former Senator Rex Patrick, who some of you would be aware of. But they're even worse than the Public Interest Disclosure Act for the federal public sector. And there's any number of examples of whistleblowers who have spoken up in good faith and have had no protections. So that's the legal landscape for whistleblowers in the public and private sectors, and things are about to get a whole lot worse because the federal government at the moment has proposed changes to the Freedom of Information laws, which will make it more difficult to get information out of the government. Do you want to can I go down this rabbit hole now?
Yeah, sure. Well, I had people might have seen this piece from Jason Katsoukas in the Saturday paper last weekend. It was pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
In principle, there's a brief extract. In principle, Anthony Albanese says he backs open government. In practice, as Prime Minister, he's grown increasingly hostile to it. He hates transparency. One Labor advisor tells the Saturday paper, loathes it. I thought this was interesting. Even the acronym has its own crude nickname among those who work on the ministerial wings mid-blue carpet, FOI, fuck off idiot. So this is the respect that our political class has for our right to know. But it goes on to detail it. So it's things about introducing more onerous requirements for people making freedom of interest.
So here's the thing, right? During the last 3.5 years of a Labor government, the number of FOI requests has actually gone down, believe it or not. But the time taken to process an FOI request in the last 3.5 years has gone up. So it does raise the question, why are we needing to clamp down if the number of requests are going down, particularly when there's been no public consultation and when some of the proposed changes are here's an example. The categorisation of material which is protected from FOI will be expanded from things that are strictly cabinet in confidence, this is just an example, to any material that is associated with cabinet in confidence material. So the example I was joking with Greg Barnes just before this meeting tonight was, in theory, if these reforms go through, if there's a scandal involving an army combat boot, that could be judged as related to, it's a defence matter, and defence matters, well, they're before the Cabinet, so they can't be explored. I mean, the Cabinet's discussing AUKUS submarines. So clearly, Army combat boots are covered by Cabinet in confidence. That was a bit convoluted, but do you get the point? So you expect to see these FOI changes fiercely resisted in the Parliament.
I've got some others to put some little bit of meat on the bone. If passed without amendment, the proposed law will impose a 40-hour processing cap on all FOI requests, allowing Commonwealth agencies to refuse broad or complex requests. It will empower them to reject applications they deem vexatious or harassing, and ban anonymous requests by requiring applicants to identify themselves and, in some cases, provide proof of identity. The bill would, I can't imagine any problems with that at all. The bill would, for the first time at the federal level, allow fees to be charged for lodging requests and seeking reviews, adding a direct financial hurdle for those trying to obtain documents. It also seeks to widen cabinet and deliberative process exemptions, which are often used to deny FOI requests, and allow for the routine redaction of public servants' names from released material.
So can I loop back? If Richard Boyle, our tax office whistleblower, was to anonymously seek to do an FOI to collect information on the tax office before he blows the whistle, that would be denied to him because it was anonymous. So there you go.
Wonderful.
Do you think the Libs or Labor are worse on this issue? Sorry,
No,
I just can't help it.
That's a very good question. What do you think?
You're the guy that's
power, right? All governments lie. People can have all the policy positions they like, but once they get into power, as you said before, the deference is to secrecy and
I'll answer that straight. The most disappointing has been this government, because this government was elected in 2022 and re-elected in 2025, promising to be the most transparent and open government and to end the secrecy of the 9 years of Conservative rule.
Yes.
And it has not done that. It was elected in 2022 with an ironclad promise to do a deep review, root and branch review of whistleblower protections. Since then, it has not done anything other than a few technical changes to the Public Interest Disclosure Act. It has done no changes effectively to the Corporations Act. It says it's doing a review now, but just like this, God, this is a licence to unleash. Just like they said they would reform environmental laws, the only effective reform the last 3.5 years of Labor government has done is to weaken the Environment Protection and Biodiversity. I'll start that again. The Environment Protection and Biodiversity Act to allow continuing salmon farming in Macquarie Harbour and to kill off the Maugean skate. And they said they would fix the Public Interest Disclosure Act, and they haven't done it, and all they're doing is talking about tightening freedom of information.
Well, how big a role does FOIs play in your work that you've done over the years, Mel?
Yeah, when I was in the investigations unit, it was a big thing.
Yep.
But it was so frustrating. You know, it was unbelievably frustrating. I went to court many times. I represented myself. You'd be appalled to hear, and tried to get them to release all sorts of things. I mean, they've got I was mostly dealing with Victorian government, and it was really hard to get anything out of them. I'm just amazed that the Albanese government has made this move, you know, and they haven't even built a case for it. I mean, the two reasons they've given that foreign actors might be able to be getting, I mean, yeah.
It's Iran. Iran is applying FOI requests.
Yes, yeah. What they really, I mean, it's kind of crazy. And then that AI bots, you know, and there was some evidence, it was on Media Watch last night, there was some evidence of a public servant saying no, from the Attorney General's Department saying, no, we haven't had any experience of that. I see that they've also, but they're confusing AI bots with AI-generated content. And if you're doing an FOI request and maybe you are putting a bit of AI-generated content, but who cares? I mean, it's still. Do you know what I mean? It's not. It's not really. They've not actually built their case at all for this.
I believe they're blaming Rex Patrick as well and saying that he's. I think Albanese, according to this article in Parliament, Anthony Albanese said Rex Patrick is getting paid to make FOI submissions. Rex Patrick denies that and says that's not the case. In that same article, Labor's reforms of freedom of information laws are opposed by every public submission made to the Senate. So everyone who's actually chipping in for that process of asking people what they think it's a terrible idea. Are they going to get through as they are? Are they going to be amended? Do we know how they're going to go?
We don't know. We don't know exactly what the final look of the bill will be after amendments or, sort of shifting sands. I suspect the opposition will support the amendments.
No way.
So I suspect the amendments will go through unless the opposition wants to put aside their personal self-interest and just politicise it and have it as another defeat for the government.
Okay.
But the trend line is clear.
Yeah.
And that's the alarming thing. The trend line is clear.
Exactly.
Governments crave secrecy. Governments don't like whistleblowers. When you look at the treatment of whistleblowers and the treatment of journalists over the last couple of decades, whistleblowers are to be demonised, discredited, jailed. Messages are to be sent to other officials. Don't go down that same path or you'll get the same treatment. Journalists are being raided, which has a chilling effect not just on the journalist that's been raided, it has a chilling effect on the whole profession, I think. You know, it's all too hard. Don't go there.
Greg, I'd love to talk about what you would love to see. Like, what would a truly transparent process look like? I think you've made the case or mentioned your obviously support for a Human Rights Act in Australia. We have these massive gaps in our constitution. They don't have constitutional protection. So I'd love to hear you speak about that a little bit. And also, I must say, in your list of all the protections, you did not mention the US protection of freedom of speech, the First Amendment. Do you think that's an important protection?
Well,
that we have,
I think it's a very important protection. And the US position, I think, is a position Australia ought to adopt. And I think a good example is what Lydia Thorpe said the other day when she said, burn the house down. Now, that in the United States would be protected. And the reason it would be protected is this, and I think this ought to be the model for Australia. So in the US, when the US Supreme Court operated as an intellectual force and wasn't corrupt, as it is now, at least in the case of 6 of the judges, there were judges such as William O. Douglas, a very famous judge, William Brennan, and there are 2 key cases in the United States Supreme Court which deal with freedom of speech, and they in essence say this: unless there is an immediate threat of a threat of violence, an incitement to violence, unless that's the case, then the speech is protected under the First Amendment. And that ought to be the case in Australia. Now, the caveat I'd put on that, though, is that one of the problems in the US, so that ought to be the general position, but I think there need to be carve-outs. And the carve-outs are these: if you're an Indigenous Australian, people like Pauline Hanson and others say, I'm exercising my right to freedom of speech. And there need to be protections for people, minority groups in particular, because freedom of speech to an Indigenous Australian is something very different to the bourgeoisie. So, the American position is correct, subject to carve-outs. One of the reasons that defamation laws in Australia are as they are is because we don't have that constitutional protection. I mean, there's that famous American case of O'Sullivan, I think it's O'Sullivan in the New York Times, which essentially says that, defamation rights in America are very narrow. They're protected. So that I think is the ideal position. And you need to constitutionally entrench it, as is the case in the United States, as in the case in Canada. But of course, even then, they can be vulnerable. Look what Trump is doing to universities. I mean, these are all institutions exercising First Amendment rights, but Trump comes in. So a dictator and an authoritarian can always override the best intentions of a constitution, but at least if you've got it there, if you've got a court that'll stand up to it, unlike the current US Supreme Court, then you've got a chance.
Is there any, there's obviously a lot of criticisms of human rights acts and a Charter of Bill Rights from the Conservative side of politics. Would there be support for something like that, do you think, entrenching
I'll tell you what's ironic about the Conservatives. So a few years ago, they wanted to abolish Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. They were red hot on it. Andrew, remember, they're in the Parliament, they were red hot on it, right? After the Bolt case, etc., they wanted to get rid of it because they thought that they ought to be able to say what they like about Aboriginal Australians. Now they love it. It's become the Zionist's best friend. And the right is running around saying it's a very important protection to stop anti-Semitism in Australia. So, that's one of the issues with the right and its hypocrisy on this. But the right is opposed to a Human Rights Act, that is the right as we have it today, because they don't believe in human rights. The Liberal Party doesn't believe in human rights. I mean, if you're a genuine Liberal, you don't belong to the Liberal Party anymore. So, and let me just tell you, there are plenty of people in the Labor Party, particularly Catholics, who oppose a Human Rights Act. And they oppose it because they think everybody's going to go out and get an abortion.
A footnote, I've moved...
Well, they do.
Sure.
I've moved an Australian Human Rights Bill twice in the federal parliament. And on neither occasion did it get the support of either the Coalition or the Labor Party.
Good stuff. This is a fascinating conversation. I want to move along now to this other area of focus, the impact of censorship and self-censorship on what the public gets to know and what remains hidden. So we're going a bit more into media organisations and the state of the press now. So Mel, reflecting on your time in journalism, can you pinpoint those sort of moments or pressures when that risk appetite in your newsroom has sort of meant, particularly around contentious topics, has meant that, yes, as we were saying before, the stories aren't pursued or particular lines of inquiry are dropped, and the fear of being persecuted either for legal or massive cultural backlash or the law getting involved in your journalism. Can you remember moments when those have come up and have stopped us, the public, getting the full story?
Not a lot in terms of I've never ever had a commercial pressure put on me ever in 30 years. Wow. I had a interesting experience last year where I did a profile of Jamie Carr, the amazing female jockey, and at the same time, Nine was sponsoring the Spring Carnival. And so that I'd been chasing Jamie for a long time, and probably because we were a sponsor, I actually got that interview finally. There was the VRC, the racing club, was extremely nervous the whole time, and they were on me at me the whole time. And they used all sorts of ways to go through the advertising department, through my editor, to try to get me to fall into line. But never once did I have anyone, my editor or anyone, say, you need to do this way. I think at least in my organisation, the commercial pressure is overblown. The idea that we are pressured, I've never found it. With defamation, the thing that really worries me, that I've been grappling with a lot in my work in the last year or two, is that these days we want to tell women's stories as thoroughly as we can. We want to, if they've got an experience of rape or sexual assault or family violence, in my profiles I want to tell that really, really well, and I want to give them a voice. But that goes right up against defamation law. So there have been several times where the woman wants to tell her story, and the lawyers will say, that guy might sue.
I mean, people have said that the Me Too movement did not really have its full reckoning in Australia because of our defamation laws, right?
Yeah, that's 100% true.
Yeah.
I think, and maybe Greg will
I want to come in on this.
disagree with me about this, sure. But the law does not serve women well. When it never has, it still hasn't, and I wish I could sit here and tell you that I know the answer to this, because I don't. All I can do is push against our lovely lawyers who are just trying to protect us and the organisation. But I feel that women are not fully able to express their full histories. Yeah.
Greg?
Well, I mean, I hear you, and I don't disagree with your general proposition, Mel, but people have a right to a fair trial. Everybody has a right to a fair trial. And there is nothing more insidious in terms of undermining of the rule of law than trial by media. It is appalling whenever and wherever it happens. We have a jury system in this country. If we had judges alone, I wouldn't mind. But we have a jury system in this country, and jurors are vulnerable to media. And this idea that somehow they can put it all aside is nonsense. And there has to be circumspection shown by the media in the way in which it reports on cases. But we don't see it. I've had clients who've suffered as a result of media coverage, adverse media coverage, in the lead up to a trial. I'll go back to the Pell case because I think it's an important example. People confuse, and I get it all the time, Greg, how can you defend George Pell? I'm not defending George Pell. I am defending George Pell, as a citizen who is entitled to a fair trial, he was subjected to blanket negative coverage before his trial. Appalling negative coverage before his trial. If he had a judge-alone trial, if that had been allowed, he would have been acquitted. He was acquitted in the High Court 7-0. People say it was a technicality. Let me tell you, it was not a technicality. The High Court had the last word on that case, as it should have. But the conduct of some of the media in that case was disgraceful. And if he'd had a judge-alone trial in Victoria, let me tell you, he would have been acquitted. Now, you know, a free press is fundamentally important. And, you know, I'm involved in the information rights project. I believe in a free press. I also believe in the bedrock principle that everybody is entitled to a fair trial, and the media need to respect that.
Andrew?
Seeing as we're being controversial...
Yeah, go on.
Some of you would be aware I've been very active in gambling reform, and I've been very outspoken about the behaviour more recently of the online and sports betting companies. And I have, on 3 occasions, actually moved a bill in the Parliament and received no support that would put a positive obligation on gambling companies to satisfy themselves that big money being gambled is not the proceeds of crime. If they suspect it is the proceeds of crime, to report it to the authorities, and if they don't do that, then a federal court can order the gambling company to pay the money themselves to the victim, the original victim of the theft. There's also the issue of the controversial issue of a ban on gambling advertising. This is the controversial bit. Not one commercial media outlet has given fulsome media coverage to those matters. Not one. It's been left to the ABC and SBS to cover those matters because the ABC, I'm not so sure about SBS, don't pocket hundreds of millions of dollars of gambling advertising revenue. And that's shameful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank God we have public broadcasters in this country, I think. Because of those reasons. You know, this is what people completely miss when they talk about, oh, if the ABC is so great, just privatise it and sell it off. Because no, by doing that, you fundamentally change the nature of that as a news organisation. And the fact that it doesn't have advertisers allows it to do the fearless kind of journalism that it does. That's not to say there isn't great journalism at commercial outlets. That's not what I'm saying. But the presence of public broadcasting, I think, is crucial to this conversation. I, for one, am very glad we have them, not just because they sometimes give me jobs. All right, we are getting slowly towards the end of our conversation, but we want to hear from you as well. If we could have the Slido QR code up there, please, Nevna, thank you very much. So if you're a tech whiz and you're into scanning QR codes, you can scan this fantastic QR code and submit your question via Slido to us, and we'll have those conversations come through and I'll put them to the panel. If you'd rather just ask a question to a microphone, we can accommodate that too. But I've got 2 more things that I'd really love to run by a panel, and then we'll come to those audience questions. But again, get Slidoing if you'd like, and scan that QR code. I mean, the thing hanging over this conversation to me is the impact of the war in Gaza over the past 2 years. And I'd like to just hear your reflections on that in the context of this conversation. In August, the International Federation of Journalists put the death toll of Palestinian journalists during this conflict at 240. It is the deadliest conflict for journalists in recorded history. Recently, the MEAA federal president, Mikey Slezak, described the killing of those journalists in Gaza while Israel continued to block all other journalists from entering the region independently to cover the genocide as the greatest attack on press freedom in the world today. I've been going crazy these past 2 years. I'm sure there are just a litany of examples of, in my view, journalistic malpractice, really sinister lobbying efforts to try and influence the media coverage of this particular war. The list is quite long. Antoinette Lattouf obviously comes to mind. The Mary Kostakidis case. There was a recent story about SBS still not acknowledging the existence of Palestine or recognising Israel's genocide. We had the independent journalist Chris Hedges' appearance at the National Press Council Club being cancelled. The press club denied they cancelled his speech, thanks to the great work of Lamestream, which is a great independent outlet. My friends Osman Faruqi and Scott Mitchell do great work there. We know that he was actually confirmed for an event, which was then cancelled. We also learnt or drew attention to the fact that National Press Club is sponsored by major weapons manufacturers, which was very bizarre. What do we think about the past 2 years of this war? What has it taught to us about the level of press freedom in this country, people's commitment to journalistic values, both the good and the bad? I'd be really interested in hearing all of you reflect on the impact of that on this particular topic. Maybe starting with you, Mel, if you don't mind.
Well, the killing of journalists in Gaza has been so appalling. You know, it's been 100 and something, 150, I can't remember.
200, the figure was put at over 240.
240, I mean, it's unbelievable, unbelievably sad. And it came to the point where there was virtually nobody could send their journalists in there, and that's exactly what was the required, what they wanted to happen. No witnesses, I guess. This issue has been aired internally and a bit externally, and I'm probably not. I don't know if this view is shared by many on the news floor, but I'm the chair of the Independence Committee for The Age, and my strong view is that editors and senior journalists should not have taken any of these trips to Israel.
Well said.
And I have, friends and colleagues who have taken those trips. But to me, there's a couple of problems with them. I think that they create a kind of an access afterwards,
yes,
which is priceless if you're if you're lobbying. But also the Palestinians can't match it.
Exactly.
So you can't have balance there. If the Palestinians, I'm not a big one for junkets at all, and they should always be declared, but that's the other problem, is where are they declared? And I put to the management that I think they should be declared. But I think that we should no longer do those trips. Yeah.
Yeah. Well said. There was a crazy story that came out this week about Douglas Murray, and whatever you think of his journalism, whatever, presents himself as an unbiased commentator on these matters. Turns out he was writing speeches for the Israeli ambassador in 2014, and yet still claims to be an independent journalist on these things. But Greg, your thoughts on the past 2 years of conflict and what it tells us about press freedom in Australia?
Can I just congratulate Mel on what she said, because it takes a bit of courage when you embedded at a very senior level in news organisations to say what you said. No, don't worry. When it comes to the unfair dismissal, I'll look after you.
That was a little bit of a courageous decision, Minister.
No, but Mel is absolutely right. But can I say more generally, I think the most appalling organisation in this conflict has been the ABC. Without a shadow of a doubt. It is an utterly gutless organisation. The only one who gets away with it is John Lyons, who is a friend of mine, a great Australian, and was a great supporter of Julian. But the ABC, I mean, let's go. What happened was a genocide, right? And the hypocrisy. This is the hypocrisy of the Australian media. Rip into Russia, they rip into China, but they leave the Israelis alone. Yes. And that's the ABC, right? That is the weakness of the ABC, right? Senior people in the ABC who allow this to happen. And look at Lattouf. I mean, you've had, and I'll end on this, but you've had judges now on a couple of occasions recognise this genocide. And Justice Rangia's judgment in Lattouf is extraordinary, because he says the ABC were effectively suborned by the Zionist lobby to get rid of Lattouf. I mean, you think about it. This stuff, again, as I say, the hypocrisy is if it happened in Russia, we go berserk, but when it comes to Israel. But Russia's not committing a genocide. China's not committing a genocide. Israel is, but we take the soft touch. And we always have this thing, we've got to have balance. We've got to have balance. Well, they don't worry about balance when it comes to Russia. It's a pylon. Or when it comes to China, it's a pylon, right? But the ABC, when it comes to Israel, you've got to be very careful. We've got to be very careful what we say, and we've got to have balance. Sometimes you don't have to have balance. When there's a genocide being committed, I don't think there's any room for balance, and that's the great fault of the ABC.
I can't add to that.
Andrew, you don't want to follow that?
Yeah, well, no, I agree. I've been shocked by the bias in the media directed at other media.
Yeah.
If for News Corp, the war in Gaza has been an opportunity to beat up any media that's not News Corp.
That's right.
And this thing about you're not allowed to criticise the behaviour of the Israeli government because that makes you anti-Semitic. Where does that come from? It's scandalous. It's absolutely scandalous. I think back 20 years ago when I spoke up about, criticised the invasion of Iraq, the Jewish media in Sydney labelled me anti-Zionist. Because I was opposing a war that was in Israel's best interest. I mean, I wish we'd just get our feet on the ground here and have an intelligent discussion. I'll loop back to my comment earlier. It's way beyond time for journalists to start reporting the news.
Well, in terms of good
Some
things,
journalists.
I mean, the role of the independent media, and I'm thinking particularly of Declassified Australia and Michael West media as well, these independent outlets that I think are, in this time of chaos and confusion and, yes, outrageous, journalistic failures, we've seen these independent voices come through, and I think that's a good thing. That's a good side, to me, of the spread of social and independent media. These are media outlets that take their jobs still very seriously, and there are lots of people who don't, but these outlets do, and they cut through and have broken some pretty massive stories, particularly on this, and particularly Declassified and Australia's two-way arms trade with Israel, that I think is vital.
I'll loop back, though, again, use that term. People believe what they want to believe. And hence there is an enormous, the public interest is served by the media being objective and restricting its editorialising to its opinion pages. And I think some media companies have completely and utterly abandoned that understanding of the public interest. And when people will believe what they want to believe, it's more important than ever that they are fed honest, straight, factual information. And our kids, again to make this point, if kids are taught critical thinking, I'm not sure our kids are being taught critical thinking anymore. I'm not sure that we were taught critical thinking.
We'll get some more of that. Just before we come to audience questions, the other part of this conversation I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on is the question of media concentration. Because I think for me it's important to distinguish, to say I believe in a free press, absolutely. That doesn't mean I believe in a completely unregulated media, particularly when it comes to media ownership. And I think what we've seen recently with the Ellison family, this is crazy to me. Larry Ellison is the world's richest man, and he's basically becoming the new Rupert Murdoch. He's very good friends with Trump. He and his son David Ellison now have massive stakes in the tech world. They're taking over TikTok. They've got Skydance Studios, which has now bought out Paramount, which owns CBS and Channel 10 here in Australia, where they've put Barry Weiss in charge of CBS News, which is fucking insane. They are said to be preparing a bid for Warner Brothers Discovery, which would mean they would also own HBO and CNN. And if you're worried, surely that's not legal, well, the US FCC is led by Trump loyalist Brendan Carr, who was the guy who fully bucked taking Jimmy Kimmel down off air for his very mild comments about Charlie Kirk's assassination recently. So I suppose I'm interested in that. How does the realities of corporate media and media ownership, and the fact that some, a very small group of people are owning more and more slices of the media, it seems, surely that also has an impact on our ability as the public to hear the full story and, have a meaningfully true free press. How do you see all that sort of playing into the conversation, Greg?
Well, I mean, this is a classic example of, lack of decent competition policy and carve-outs. We were talking about carve-outs earlier, carve-outs for the media from competition policy rules. I mean, in a genuine market, you would have a large number of players and you would have rules that stop cross-vesting, which we used to have a crack at in Australia, I think, until, Murdoch and Packer sort of took it all over. But I think to pick up your point, though, you go to the alternatives now. I mean, I don't read, I don't spend much time reading the dailies anymore because it's just a commoditised product, so much of it. I always read Melissa, but but I don't. I mean, the Age and the Herald now are, for example, exactly the same, except for a bit of local news, right? I mean, that's all they are. But so you go elsewhere because real news, as in what's happening, and Andrew talks about it in an unbiased way, you often find in other spheres. But I think that the problem with media is, and this goes back to Hearst, it's always been the plaything of those who want power, assume power and think they have power. And I don't know how you break it. I mean, it's interesting just quickly in South Africa, a country for which I have a great deal of respect. I mean, talk about a country that stood up against Israel because they understand apartheid. But in South Africa, you have a number of very good independent outlets, such as the Daily Maverick, the Mail and Guardian, or the Mail and Guardian, as they say. But you have a huge media diversity, and I've been there. Now, I don't know what drives that, but South Africa's an interesting democracy in that sense.
Just briefly, Mel, I mean, from the inside of the media, are you concerned about media concentration, how that plays into this?
Absolutely. But I think there's two big problems. One is that you have these capital cities in Australia that they just have a Murdoch paper or a Murdoch outlet, like the Mercury, you guys know so well.
I should say I take a check from the Mercury.
The Advertiser and the Courier Mail in Brisbane. This is a real problem, I think, for democracy. And then the other problem is, I think, that we've seen that we just don't have strong regional papers anymore. So in my dad reads the Examiner in Launceston. It's a bit of a shadow of itself. I love the Examiner, but they're so important, and because they build community, and community is really important.
And Andrew, just briefly, am I right in thinking that Keating sort of unwound a lot of the media ownership laws back in the day? And should we bring that back? Should we break up some of these companies? Or is that a threat to journalistic freedom, having such a concentration?
No, of course we should break up the media concentration. Yep. Last time I checked, about three-quarters of print media in Australia was owned by News Corporation. Is that still about right?
Yes, I think it's about right, yeah.
And under using the excuse of new technologies and online, there seems to be a willingness of governments these days to break down media concentration laws even further. But can I add, and I'm not planning to travel to the United States anytime soon, so I will remind you, and some of you are students of history would remember this, that media moguls should be careful what they wish for. It was the most powerful media moguls in Germany that supported the rise of Adolf Hitler. Yeah. And then once Adolf Hitler had become all powerful, he cut loose those media moguls once he didn't need them anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
That was a sobering thought, wasn't it?
Yes. Tough gig. This is the toughest comedy gig I've ever been on. We have so many questions coming in on us, Harlow. Thank you very much for that. If you'd rather ask a question in the room, maybe if you want to pop up your hand, and Nevna might come find you with a microphone shortly. But let me run some of these by our panel. Let's keep our responses relatively quick if we can, just so we can get through some more of them. This is from Craig. How do you believe digital media and AI threaten press freedom? This may involve profitability, independence, and AI summaries in search results. Maybe first of all, Mel, is AI playing a big role in your journalism at the moment?
We're definitely onto it. We have very strict rules around whether if any of our reporting is AI assisted, that has to be declared. We have been looking at ways that it hallucinates, and we're very careful in how we use it. It may replace some journalists, though. Let's face it. The digital aspect, we've been dealing with that for such a long time now, and I think we've wrestled with the beast, and we're really a digital organisation as well as a dead tree organisation. So yeah.
Did anyone else want to speak to AI? No,
not on that one.
Helen has asked, why in Australia is there now a crime called hate speech? Now, I would have thought that the hate speech laws have been around for a little while, but do you want to respond to that, Greg?
There are hate speech laws. This is a very difficult and complicated philosophical and jurisprudential issue. Now, I'm not being silly about that. It's highly complicated. There are reasons for hate speech laws. but on the other hand, they can be abused. And striking that balance between what you call hate speech on the one hand and what you say is permissible is always difficult, and that's where you need that's why you have independent courts. If you take, for example, what Lydia Thorpe said, we have to burn the Parliament down. Now, at one level, the level I would operate at would say, well, it's a time-old expression that generally talks about a sense of liberation. It's been used elsewhere. She's got no means to carry it out. Some others might take a view that it is in fact an incitement. Now, where does the balance lie? And that's always the difficulty. And that's why I think hate speech, there's no right or wrong answer. I think legislators like Andrew have a tough job with these laws, because getting that balance right and getting the phrasing of legislation right in these areas is extremely difficult. So I don't think you can say you're anti-hate speech laws or you're pro-hate speech laws. I think it really depends on, you've got to look at the legislation, you've got to look at the case law and see where it's taken you.
Well, this might be relevant to our conversation about press freedom. To me, it seems to be the ongoing conversation around the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and the way that might affect people's ability to criticise and comment on the actions of Israel.
That is an example of, and again, in this case, gutless universities, that is an example of censorship. The IHRA definition has been rejected by some courts. It is a form of censorship, and I don't think any person committed to the rule of law and liberal democracy could accept it as being anything other than that. And just on that, the anti-Semitism envoy's claim that funding should be removed from arts organisations and universities if they're not doing enough to combat anti-Semitism is one of the most Trumpian things that I think we've ever heard in this country.
We'll take a question from the floor shortly. Here's another one. What information from government should not be allowed to be reported on? And that's from Anonymous. We'll obviously track that person down after the show, but what an interesting question. Is there anything that should be completely off limits? Question. Andrew Wilkie.
Well, some of you would be aware of my background as a former intelligence official who revealed intelligence material. So you might be surprised to hear from me that I agree. I do think there are some information is genuinely sensitive and genuinely should be kept secret. Where that line is arguable. Let's go back to World War II. Was it okay, this is a rhetorical question, was it okay for the Allies to keep secret the preparations for D-Day? Now, I think a reasonable person would probably say that was a genuine secret, and it was in the interest of many nations to keep it secret from the Nazis. At the other end of the spectrum, was it okay for the Australian government to keep secret its real reasons for the invasion of Iraq in 2003? Well, clearly that was a scandalous deception of the Australian people. Where is the line in the middle? There's 100 people in the room. I think we'll get 100 slightly different answers. But I would hope we would agree that when something is genuinely in the national interest, then it is fair enough to keep it confidential.
And it's fair to say the balance has tipped so far in the favour of the national security state, in which almost, as you were saying before, almost anything can be dressed up and presented as a national security
that's exactly
concern.
right. And now here's a really interesting case study. Some of you would be aware of Bernard Cleary acted as a lawyer for witness K. K?
Yeah.
I've lost track of all the letters, yeah. So witness K was an Australian Secret Intelligence Service officer who was involved in the bugging of the East Timor Parliament building in order to give Australia an unfair advantage during the bilateral treaty negotiations over basically the Timor Gap and the royalties from oil and gas.
Yeah.
It was eventually revealed. It became a public issue. Witness K was convicted for breaching national security legislation by revealing that spying. I made a formal complaint to the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security because I claimed that spying for a commercial advantage for Australia was a breach of the Intelligence Services Act. The IGIS replied that no, Australia's economic security is a legitimate part of our national security.
Oh, Jesus.
Now, I'll take it from that grain that many of us would agree that was a ridiculous finding by the IGIS. You know,
the CIA had to stage those coups because America's economic security was dependent on them exploiting resources from a variety of different countries.
So where is the line? And that line is something that's sometimes decided by courts. It's more often decided by governments. And hence, that's why we need governments of integrity, and we too often don't.
I'll just quickly, I mean, the journalists and media organisations in Australia have had a long history of negotiating with governments over D-notices. I don't know if they're still called that, but these are very important matters of defence or whatever that if we publish them, people might die. That state secrets might be released that damage the national interest. So there has been a long history of that. The line, I can tell you the line because I think that Annika Smethurst suffered the line, which was when she was raided. Really, that's about embarrassment.
Yeah.
That's not about state secrets. That's about the fact she was embarrassing those people. And so I think we need to be very clear about that. But there is negotiation that goes on, and I think legitimately so.
And the state always fails to recognise journalists' commitment to protecting their sources, right? Like they want to prosecute journalists for the crime of keeping this information closed when everyone knows journalists have to protect their sources, otherwise they'll be terrible journalists and they'll be throwing people under the bus. And the fact that the state can't recognise that, and the fact the state gets more outraged at the uncovering of the wrongdoing than the wrongdoing itself is a disgrace. Nemda, yes, thank you. Question for the floor, please.
Question from our audience.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the group, because you've already touched on the issue in the Middle East. What concerns me, and you've mentioned it, Greg, you've mentioned about the ABC. All the journalists, all the media never use the word genocide. I haven't seen one media source, whether it's the SBS, the ABC, all the commercial stations, all the newspapers, they don't want to use that word. It's like you can't use it. I want to know from the speakers, particularly Melissa, what is the justification for that?
I'm not close enough I've not reported on it, I don't know. But I've noticed the same thing, although the other day I did notice that on the ABC they had a news item which did actually have the word genocide. And then after the news item finished, there was a comment like the Israeli government doesn't accept. So that was really interesting because I thought that was an incremental push towards.
I mean, that's like saying, Nazi Germany doesn't respect,
People don't tend to say, we're totally doing a genocide. I will say I read a piece from Paul Sakal in the SMH today, and the framing is often there have been findings by human rights organisations and a UN Commission of Inquiry that describe what Israel is doing as a genocide. But yes, far too little too late in my personal opinion.
Well, he also wrote that stupid piece on the Greens.
Well, yes, he did, which was very bad.
But he's pro-Israel.
It's a constant frustration I've found, this is true of the 9 Vax papers, is a framing of Australia's relationship to Israel as a two-way arms trade. They will never definitively give us a question. They'll say, the Greens say Australia has a two-way arms trade, the government says we don't. The end. I'm like, hang on, that's not your job. Your job is to give us a definitive answer on that. And in fact, thanks to reporting in Declassified and at the ABC, we know that export licences have continued between Australia and Israel post-October the 7th. So that's one particular point on this conflict that's driven me quite crazy. But we're seeing public opinion tide and change there, and some outlets have responded accordingly.
I wonder if some media are just scared stiff of taking sides.
But the truth isn't a side, Andrew.
Oh, no, I'll take sides. It is genocide.
Yes.
Of course it is.
But then you've got the Australian that takes sides, and we condemn it for taking sides. But then you've got the Australian government sort of doesn't want to take sides, and some media don't want to take sides because they don't want to offend anyone.
But everyone should be on the side of being against genocide, right? Like the idea that is, yes, presented as a side. I mean, this binary is presented between Israel and Palestine, but I expect my press to take the position that genocide is bad and that international law should be respected and that the truth should be exposed.
Well, I mean, we had no problem with Rwanda, right? The media, and rightly. This is the preponderance of scholarship in international law is that this is genocide, right? I mean, that's the consensus view. It's like climate change.
Yes.
Right? So why don't we say it?
Yeah.
What stops us? I'll tell you what stops us. Because it's Israel, and because the pressure will come on, the harassment, the bullying of the bosses. I mean, you want to talk to Bob Carr about it. What happened to him after he came out and shifted on it? You know, the harassment he got from, you've probably had it, Andrew, the harassment from the Zionist lobby.
Sorry to interrupt the panel. We've got a question from the front, and I'll come back to the middle there.
Oh, the great man. John Shipton.
Hi. Just a brief preamble. Craig Murray and Roger Craig Murray wrote the strategy paper for the ICJ, the International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice. He wrote that, and he and Roger Waters shopped it around Geneva until they got a nibble, and that strategy paper was on the cabinet table in South Africa when the decision was made. How do we learn things and what motivates us? So I've always fought with Greg and my fellow comrades about media. What is media? Well, just to give you an example, which is framed as a question. When Trump has a meeting, 50,000 people rock up, there's 5,000 reporters. These things. That is spread by a factor of 5, 250,000 for one meeting. Tucker Carlson interview with Vladimir Putin, 1 billion views. Joe Rogan is paid $180 million a year because he gets 300 million views per annum. That's what moves us, and that's the source of the change in attitude to the genocide in the Middle East, in West Asia. I can't say the name of that country because it brings forth demons, but that's the question. What moves us? And I see from your commentary that you believe that the structure that's used to exist still moves us, when it's surely the case that it doesn't move us at all.
Well, John, I don't disagree with you. I think in relation to Tucker Carlson, for example, who I know you know, I don't know him, but I know Gabriel knows him, there's no doubt that he is of influence. I mean, when Tucker Carlson interviewed Ted Cruz and said to Cruz, how many people live in Iran, this country you want to invade? And he said, I don't know. That's news, right? And that's shifted opinion. So I don't disagree with you about the breakup of the atomisation, if you like, of media. I think you've long said it, and I took a while to come round, but of course you are the eminence. And no, he's a great friend. But I think you make a very valid point, John.
Does anyone else want to respond?
Yeah, look, I want to finish on a bit of a positive note here. Almost finish. I'm inherently an optimist, and I am very optimistic about the power of people and the effectiveness of people organising, and with modern technology we can organise even better. Here's a few examples. This federal government is phasing out the export of live sheep to the Middle East. That has only come about because of sustained public pressure at the grassroots level over years. This government has recognised, for what it's worth, the state of Palestine. That has only come about because of sustained grassroots pressure over a couple of years. This government, okay, it's not going nearly far enough on addressing climate change, but it's gone a darn sight further than the previous government, and that is only because of sustained grassroots pressure over years. You know, it's easy to be despondent at big media and big names, but I'm actually quite optimistic. You know, when we mobilise, and we can mobilise so much more effectively because of that phone and things, and I think I've got 5 teenage children. Don't ask me to 3 teenage stepsons and 2 teenage daughters, and I look at their worlds and their media feeds. They can be mobilised, and they do mobilise. Think about the school strikes for climate. Now, these were really powerful. You know, I think things are not lost, but we've just got to keep fighting, because the moment we stop fighting, the other side wins.
One more, Nevda, or are we going to leave it there?
Just an interjection on that. What about the access for the youth to get onto digital platforms? Because now you have to be over 16. You know, we need to generate people's critical thought within primary school and public schools. You know, it begins somewhere. It doesn't begin at uni. It doesn't begin
Just for folks who couldn't hear maybe on the microphone there, which is a question about the under-16s social media ban, a criticism of that, perhaps thinking about our young people.
It won't work. It's a dud. It won't.
It's all bullshit.
Don't worry about it.
There you go. It's all bullshit, everybody. Wonderful news.
Tom, we've just got one more question.
No, I don't. But please don't be offended. We're not making light of the question. I originally thought it was a great idea until I actually looked into it, and I realised it's a complete dud and it won't work. So I'm not too scared by it.
Okay. Why do you want to do it? I mean, it's built on mythology, right? And the mythology is that somehow there's this link, inextricable link between, for example, youth suicide, youth crime, etc., and access. There's work out there in progress, but this has suddenly become a gospel. It's like this idea that if you lock kids up, there'll be, suddenly crime will
Total
go down.
crime. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm all for it.
You're for it?
Yeah, I don't care if it doesn't work. It just lets me say to my 11-year-old, no. And the Australian government back me up.
We've just got one more question.
We go for one more, Nevda? Yep, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. One more question?
Yeah, given the reality that the very best time there's ever been for a human to be alive is right now, doesn't that give us great cause for hope?
Yeah. It's easy to forget that sometimes, but yes. Anyone want to respond? Well, I think you've given us our hopeful thought there, Andrew. Anyone else want to talk about? Are you hopeful, Greg?
Am I hopeful?
Yeah.
Of what?
Don't worry about it.
I tell you what, when you feel a bit depressed, what you do is you go online and you watch Paul Keating Question Time performances.
I know people who do that. Yeah.
Because they are magical. And then you watch him at the National Press Club last year where he ripped into them about... I love the way he got stuck into Matthew Knott. I actually quite like Matthew, but the way he got into Knott and that, client journalist, Peter Harcher. There's an example, right? They get duchessed by the Americans. We talk about Israel. I'll tell you the other thing, Melissa. They get duchessed by the Americans, right? Harcher and these people, they get over there and they think they're important. And then they come back and write this bullshit about AUKUS. Which, as Bob Carr said, is the greatest transfer of wealth out of Australia that I've seen. I'll leave it on that note.
Well, Greg, I wish you'd been a bit more forthright tonight, but...
I was looking for a job with you by doing impersonations.
No, you were very good.
He's
I appreciate
been a wallflower, just a total wallflower.
We could, of course, as I say, keep talking for hours, but we will wrap things up there. We'd like to let you know you can join the Information Rights Project campaign to protect press freedom by signing their open letters on their website or at the back of the room at a booth calling for David McBride's freedom and standing in solidarity with journalist Mary Kostakidis. These are simple actions, but they can help us put pressure on decision makers and show that Australians do care about the right to know and press freedom. Before we wrap up, please would you join me in thanking our fantastic panel here, Andrew Wilkie, Melissa Fyfe and Greg Barnes. My name is Tom Ballard. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Get home safe. Thank you very much.
Good job.
Serious danger to Australia.